they might land. In doing that, we're introducing today's panel, but only a half of it. So right here in the studio now is Liberal MP Aaron Violin.
Hey, Greg.
Aaron, welcome back to the program. And that's my way of saying Luke Gosling,
yes,
your Labor colleague, has only just finished on his feet in the chamber. Luke will be with us before too long. Yep. So CFMEU bill for administration. You're not going to make the perfect the enemy of the good here, are you? After calling for so many years to clean up that union, support must be on the cards for this bill.
Well, there's no doubt that something has to be done about the CFMEU and this idea, and I was talking to a friend who's in construction over the weekend about this, the idea that suddenly the Labor Premier Jacinta Allen and all these ministers are going, oh my gosh, there's all these issues with corruption in the CFMEU in Victoria. Like, people have known for years, and that's one of the reasons the Coalition brought in the ABCC. Obviously, we wanted a tougher cop on the beat, but we had to get through the House and the Senate what we could. So we'll continue to work constructively with the government. However, where a lot of scepticism lies is these deep connections between the CFMEU and the government, the Australian Labor Party, over $4 million in donations at the last election. But also, as we sit here today, Greg, there are officials from the CFMEU on the pre-selection panel in Victoria to decide the pre-selections of federal Labor members, and those pre-selections haven't been opened yet. So there's a real scepticism on our side about, is this really going to make a difference, or is this all show, and the ALP and the government are hoping this issue will move away pretty quickly?
Right. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the bill, but the powers seem fairly sweeping for the administrator once appointed. They've already, the ALP, since you raised it, severed affiliation fees and donations with Victoria, with New South Wales, with South Australia and Tasmania. It may well now extend to Queensland, Northern Territory. And those pre-selectors you referred to might also be pulled away from those panels, right?
And that's what we want to see. And we as you know, the Senate has seen the bill today. I haven't seen it myself. We internally as a party will go through our procedures to make sure we come to a good position. But we know we need to hold the CFMEU to account. We know that this lawlessness and this corruption has driven, or this alleged corruption has driven up prices on government projects in Victoria, in particular my home state, but across the country, which is taxpayer money that's been spent. We've seen project after project blow out, but we also know that flows through to private construction. But we had an astonishing moment in the House today where the new Minister for Housing, Claire O'Neill, tried to say with a straight face that this actions of the CFMEU driving up prices in the public sector is not flowing through to the private sector. But anyone who's worked in construction knows there's a flow-on effect. The wages in the private sector and the public sector of construction are tightly linked.
Yeah, there's some very large numbers being bandied about there, though. Are you among those who seriously suggest that the price premium for union activity in that sector is as high as 30%?
Well, this is part of what we're asking for, is an investigation, ideally a Royal Commission, to get to the bottom of this, to really understand what has happened, how it has been allowed to flourish, and what has the cost been to the taxpayer and also to the private sector and things like housing. And that's why we need to do multiple factors. And I mean, the other argument that I just want to talk about quickly is this argument from the government that the ABCC shouldn't exist because the criminality and these actions occurred under the former government. Well, the equivalent is to say, my house has been broken into, the police weren't doing their job, we should get rid of the police. Like, it doesn't stack up on any logic test. The ABCC, while it wasn't perfect, was finding criminality and holding people to account, civil fines as well.
Isn't their argument that it never prosecuted criminally, that it's a civil jurisdiction?
It's a civil jurisdiction, absolutely, but it's both. It's the civil jurisdiction and then obviously there's the criminal element, and that's where we need that tougher cop on the beat to really make a difference. And we need to look at all those elements. Again, the relevant minister was talking today like you could only put these new laws in and not have an ABCC, but you can do both. And we're asking for strengthening laws around this. I mean, in Victoria, the ALP in Victoria, my home state, and the union movement have big questions to ask. We've got issues with the senior leadership of the CFMEU. We've seen concerning allegations and a senior leader in the TWU stand down just this week. Yes. With, again, concerning allegations around a health services union leader needing to step down. So 3 unions in Victoria have got serious questions to ask, and the ALP and the Prime Minister are being silent on this. 3 is a lot of unions that have got issues in Victoria, and what's the Prime Minister, what's Premier Jacinta Allen doing about this? Because ultimately, their responsibility is to the union workers, not to feather in their own nest and further in their own political career.
Right, Aaron Violi, you've gone uncontested, at least from the Labor side, for a few minutes now, but we're proud and pleased to report that Luke Gosling, being fit as a fiddle, has made it very quickly out of the chamber and over to us. Thanks for doing that, Luke. Look, we were obviously talking about the CFMEU administration bill. The coalition, like the Greens, is still sitting and waiting to assess what their final position might be. On the question of your own territory, the Northern Territory, it wasn't covered by the original ALP decision to sever affiliation in other states. Do you now expect that Queensland and the Northern Territory branches of the CFMEU will cut ties with the ALP?
Oh, that's a decision for them and their members, but all I'll say is that I hope they are talking to their membership, because I think what the members of the union in our jurisdictions know is that the union exists. Sole purpose is to make sure that they've got good working conditions, safe working conditions, and good, reasonable wages. So I think that decision will be for their members. I think it's important that we just be a little bit surgical, and I think that's what our legislation is doing here. Is it's hitting where the problem is with the strongest possible measure in the form of an administrator. So I think that's good and appropriate, and I think the Parliament should support it.
To Luke's point, Aaron, there are some powerful measures in there, including for the administrator to compel a range of documents that might be held by the union. So sure, it's not the Royal Commission that you're asking for, but they're not inconsequential powers that have been written into this.
No, and as I said before, Greg, I haven't had a chance to look in detail, but it does appear that it's there is some strength there, but we need to understand the detail. But, I mean, the strongest measure is to deregister the CFMEU, and Minister Burke in the House today said, well, we don't want to deregister because they can still appear before the Fair Work Commission. Well, he actually is, or he's no longer the minister, but the government has the ability to change the legislation and ensure that a deregistered organisation can't appear before the Fair Work Commission. So they actually have the ability to take stronger action. They can deregister the CFMEU, change the Fair Work Commission legislation so a deregistered organisation can then not appear. But apparently Minister Burke, by his own admission, can do that, but isn't prepared to. So there is a stronger measure they could take here.
Right, that's quite a list. Look, we might move the conversation along since Luke joined us a little bit down the track on the CFMEU discussion. We'll do that just by recapping something that the Prime Minister had said in question time. So more than a year has passed since Parliament's Social Policy Committee, led by the late Labor MP Peter Murphy, proposed a phased but eventually complete ban on online gambling advertising in this country. A government response is coming soon. Anthony Albanese addressed this, acknowledging the recent pleas by Ms Murphy's widower, Rod Glover, and taking John Howard to task too after the former Prime Minister signed a joint letter demanding action.
I do note some people who like John Howard entering this debate, if only he'd been in a position to have some influence over public policy over this time. But the entire time that he occupied my seat, he did absolutely nothing about any of these issues.
Time has concluded.
Yeah, so both members of our panel, Aaron Violi and Luke Gosling, were present when the Prime Minister made those remarks, and there are very high levels of expectation that the government will deliver on aspects of that House Social Affairs Committee report. Luke, where do you stand on the total ban on advertising?
Or just, if I can, Greg, just quickly just pay tribute to our former colleague and good friend Peter Murphy and the great work that she did. We're all talking about this issue, and that's part of her legacy. Someone I served with in the military contacted me and just gave me a bit of an insight into his life growing up, where unfortunately his father would rather gamble than put food on the table because he was that addicted to it. And I think it underscored for me not having had that experience, how all-encompassing an issue this is. So I pay tribute to Peter and her work. It's not as if we haven't done anything. Importantly, I think we're changing the messaging. It's not about gambling responsibly. I think the evidence showed that didn't really cut through. So I think, and the Betfair regulations that we've brought in. So we've done a fair bit in this space, and I think what the PM's getting to is that we probably have done more than any other government in this regard, and we are taking it very seriously, but we do want to get the balance right, and I think that's where he was going to today.
Yeah, now the Coalition has its own set of restrictions proposed here as policy, Aaron, but where do you think this is going to land? It doesn't appear, listening to Luke or any other member of the caucus, that perhaps the full scale of those recommendations will be adopted. Yeah,
and firstly I want to echo Luke's comments, and Peter Murphy was a wonderful member of Parliament, and I think we both know her husband Rod well, and his heartfelt words today I think were read by many in Parliament and taken on board. And as a coalition, Peter Dutton announced last year, 2023, in his budget in reply that we supported banning, or our policy is to ban advertising during sporting events and just before them, which I think is a really important initiative. I've got an 8 and 11-year-old, and we watch the footy together. We love watching the Pies, not as much this year as last year, but next year, there's always next year. But they at that age shouldn't be subject to gambling. So I think as a first step, we should take gambling off the table in live sporting events. And
so you've got an open mind to doing that,
and we need to phasing and understand there is, I appreciate for sporting organisations there's commercial arrangements. You need to be respectful of that. The AFL, the NRL yes, they're big commercial organisations, but they do support grassroots. So there's a journey that you need to go on. I think that's an easy, low-hanging fruit that has bipartisan support. I hope the Prime Minister will look at. But I just quickly need to defend former Prime Minister Howard and say I thought it was very un-prime ministerial of the Prime Minister to have a crack at John Howard. I mean, let's be honest, the situation around online betting, gambling, it's a world away 20 years ago to what we're living with today. Yeah. So to stoop that low, I think says more about Prime Minister Albanese and the pressure he's under than former Prime Minister Howard. All
right, just respond to that, because we played the grab, Luke. Yeah. It was a different time, wasn't it, as far as internet and online services are concerned?
No, yeah, it was a different time when Paul Keating was the Prime Minister as well and hasn't stopped him from having his say of recent times. But yeah, look, a lot of people hear stories and have experiences and grow in awareness and understanding, like Malcolm Fraser, I'm sure, has undergone some changes in his thinking as well over time. I think what it does underscore is that very many people think this is an extremely serious issue because it causes so much harm to Australian families, and we want to help in every way we can. We've already done a fair bit in this space, and I think what the Prime Minister was doing today is just seeing if there were any other ideas out there that could be brought to the fore, and I appreciate that.
We'll await further developments very quickly and finally, and I wouldn't expect you to divulge sensitive information here, but in the context in which the President and the Speaker told us about the security review, have you actually noticed anything different today?
Oh, I can't say that I have, but I haven't been looking closely. But I think the principle of what the President and the Speaker are doing is so important. I think we were all concerned as members of Parliament with that protest last week, and then also we were, I'm very concerned. I know many members of Parliament, in Parliament we're actually relatively safe, but it's in the electorate and being able to engage with our community. That social cohesion is something we need to continue to watch. So we support bipartisan support in making sure that we're keeping the Parliament and members of Parliament and senators safe.
Yeah, how significant did you think those foreshadowed but unspecified security upgrades might be, Luke?
Yeah, Greg, I think for obvious reasons, not all of the upgrades, whether they be in intelligence or procedural upgrades, physical upgrades, have been articulated, and that's obviously for good reasons. But I just want to congratulate the Prime Minister for appointing my colleague Peter Khalil as a special envoy in that area of social cohesion. And there's been targeting, as Aaron said, of quite a few MPs, and we don't want to. That's not Australia. We don't want to live We want to let MPs be as close to their constituents as possible. Every time there's an incident, when there's a threat against one of our MPs, that lessens that ability. So that's why I think it's a shame, because there's nothing better than, I'm sure Aaron would agree, of being out there with the constituents and getting their feedback on how the opposition needs to get some policies.
Valuable part of what you all do.
We better, I know you got time, Greg, but we should congratulate my good friend Luke Gosling on also becoming a special envoy, I think, Defence, Northern Australia, and there was one other I've gone blank on. Veterans Affairs. Well done, Luke, as well.
Yes, it was going to go recognised by me.
Oh, I've stolen your
because
thunder.
he was late. He was late in his arrival. He missed out on that acknowledgement. Luke Gosling, Aaron Violi.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Now,